Hey guys, this is Scott Horne with Horne and Associates PC, here with Gary Sawson, who's also one of our national directors of title. This video, we're going to talk just about title delays, what can slow title down, getting deals closed, and maybe how to speed some things up along the way. So if you find the video helpful, guys, take a minute and like it, please. If you have any comments as we go through this, make your comments below. We'll do our very best to get back to you. And we hope you jump over and join our YouTube channel as well. So Gary, I love doing these kind of things with you. It's always fun. You know, everybody wants to close a deal yesterday, but no one understands the issues and the problems that go through it. And sometimes things work out simple, right? And they're easy. Most of the time, they don't. And of course, it's always our fault because we can't get that right. The finger goes right here real quick, and it's just like, it's your fault. And it's like, yeah, no. But let me just ask you a question. So someone brings a contract in day one. Walk me through that initial process and some time frames that could be expected that are reasonable.
Sure. So generally, once we get the order in, we'll place, a search order to get a commitment in. That usually takes roughly 2 to 4 business days.
So let me ask you a question. That 2 to 4 days is if you're, as we like to call it, in county, where the plants, you have a title plant and you have quicker access information. What if you're in some far off East Texas or South Texas county? What happens?
Then it can take longer. Generally, what we break down properties to are lot and block, which, as you said, are in town, in county. Then there's meets and bounds. You may have large parcels or in rural areas that haven't been lot and blocked yet. They still may be meets and bounds surveys. Those generally take a little bit longer. A lot of times in rural areas, you have older deeds. I've done stuff where the last deed of record was from the early 1900s.
Yep.
And it's just passed down through the family over the years. Those do take more time. They are a little bit more expensive. It's just one of those things where it really depends on where the property is and what type of property it is.
Yeah. But so you do this, and based upon location, could slow down the process, and eventually you get a commitment that comes in.
Correct. Then once the commitment comes in, then we get to work on the curative side of things. Liens, judgments, making sure we have good vesting in title, making sure that everybody who's vested in title is still around, not deceased.
This is one of the things I always like to tell investors out there is if the commitment comes in, like this just happened yesterday. We had our property owner who's owned the property for 16 years. He's in title, but so is another person. And it's like, what the heck? And so one of the escrow officers came to me and she goes, what's going on here? I said, I don't know. We need to start asking questions and seeing what's going on. This is that curative process, right? And I knew that, so I said, okay, so who sold the property? And it was a lady who sold it. I said, great. So let's look up her name and how she owned it. So sure enough, there was a husband, and the husband had passed away. I'm going, okay, that tells me a lot real quick. Either that there was a probate, but we don't have it, or there was no one did an heirship affidavit, A or B, right? And I said, let's go find out what's going on a little bit. So I started doing some searches on his name. Well, I couldn't find anything. But then I found a probate. Not a probate, I found an obituary online. And I probably got lucky there because it's, about 16 years old. And he passed away in Pottsboro, Texas, Grayson County. So I went and opened up Grayson County Clerk's website, sure enough, I found the probate right there. And you look it up, there was a will and everything else, and it left it all to the wife. But the problem is whenever they did the probate, they forgot to do a deed from the estate to the wife and didn't record it in Dallas County where the property is located. And this happens so often in the probate world. But I do this every day of the week, so to me it's second nature to hunt that kind of stuff down and figure it out. But someone has to figure that out. And we had talked to the property owners, like, can you call the original seller, who's 92 years old, and you think she's going to remember anything? No. But anyway, it's just knowing some things, but luckily I knew how to find that real quick, and bang, bang, got it done that quick. But if you don't know this kind of things, you have to go back and ask those questions, and you have to start doing the homework. I always like to tell investors, if things look traditionally reasonable, but you can always ask other questions just to verify and validate, right? But then you can come up and you got to do that little curative stuff. That's just one of the things that can slow things down in the process.
Correct. And the scenario you brought up is a scenario that we run into quite often in title. Generally a deceased spouse, or sometimes it's brothers and sisters who owned a property, you know, they got it from their parents and one of them has passed away. So that's a really common occurrence. One of the things that I like to do and I teach staff to do is, as you said, ask those questions. A simple way to ask that question right up front when you're talking to the seller is, here's who's on vesting, sir, ma'am. Is everybody who's vested on title going to be available for closing? That's a nice way of asking, has anybody passed away? Without saying it, you can ask, hey, you know, I see 3 people on title. Are all 3 of you going to be available for closing? Generally, then they'll step forward and say, well, you know, my husband passed away 2 years ago, and then you can start that process. Was there a probate? Was there an affidavit of heirship done? You know, what's the status of his estate or her estate? And then that gives you a little bit of an idea of what you have to do. No, he died without a will. There wasn't any probate. Then, you know, you have to go the affidavit of heirship route. You know, you can get that prepared, tell them what that looks like, prepare them for the documents that are going to be coming to them, the questionnaire, which they'll have to fill out, letting us know who the 2 witnesses are, getting that back to us. Then the attorney has to create the affidavit of heirship, then it has to go back out and get completed. The 2 witnesses have to have a notary, you know, witness their signatures and their affidavits. So that, I usually tell people when there's an affidavit of heirship, add 8 to 10 days to what you're looking at, right?
It can be.
Because nobody's sitting at their mailbox waiting for your letter to come in, right? Or sitting at their email saying, oh, I hope that affidavit of heirship questionnaire comes in today so I can get it answered, right? I always say there's, you know, 3 or 4 steps and allow a couple of days for each one of those steps.
You know, Gary, I also find that it's not unique at all. It's so common is, you know, so mom has passed away. Is, you know, whatever reason, women outlive us, right? I would say they kill us, but I can't say that openly. I guess I just did.
I think you just did.
But, you know, mom has passed away, the kids inherited. And so the first question I always ask is, got it, was there a dad? What happened to him? And I will tell you, 75% of the time, dad passed away, mom lived in the house. No one did anything with dad's stuff at all. They just think things happen normal and natural. And I get it. That's just human nature, and that's just a thought process. And you have to go back and do that. And then sometimes, you know, when I did one recently where there's 13 brothers and sisters. And thank goodness all were alive but one. Can you imagine if you had 6 of those, deceased? So now you're not just doing dad's heirship and mom's heirship. Now you're doing 6 additional ones. And all of a sudden things slow to a crawl and the price goes up. And it's just, things happen. But it slows the process down. As you said, nobody's waiting in the mailbox. Now, if you've got good investors who are proactive, who are dealing with things and getting it done, it moves faster. And I like to educate the investor world to try to be that way if possible to help out and to have that basic knowledge base of learning how to ask these questions. It does expedite things. But if you don't ask these questions, then when the lawyers get it, they have to ask the questions because escrow officers aren't lawyers. It has to go on the legal side to get the stuff done. And I just want to go back for a moment about this probate, because in the probate world, I see it so often where somebody will probate an estate. They might do what's called a muniment of title, but no one records anything in deeds records. There's never a deed from the estate to an heir. There's never, then you go back and get certified copies of the order admitting the will to probate the will and record that. And that brought to my mind divorces. Oh my goodness, these family law attorneys will go through and they'll do a divorce, and the wife or the husband gets the house. Okay, great. Where's the deed? You know, because the vesting is still in both their names. Our client, though, is dealing with the husband who now lives in the house and owns it, supposedly, as per this divorce decree they've got. But there's nothing in deed records. And now you got to go back and you get a deed from the wife to the husband. And of course, they're going like this, right? That's never any fun. And then if you can't get that, you've got to record that divorce decree in deed records. And nobody wants to air their dirty laundry. That way they don't have to. But it's the same process. It's just realizing all these little nuances just slow everything down to a crawl that you get it resolved. And I know that everybody wants to close, as I said earlier, yesterday. Sometimes you just can't do that because of all those issues. And I think really it's a knowledge base that I love to have investors just understand. They don't need to be like us and be the experts in it, but just having that good working knowledge helps to help us expedite that process. So once we got our commitment in, we're working through things, though other things, what else besides curing a probate issue or someone who's deceased or those kind of things, or getting something recorded of record that should have been done years ago, never happened along the way, which I see is extremely prevalent. What else hits us out there, you think?
Probably the next biggest thing we see, obviously, is open mortgages. One of the things that sometimes stalls the process is you have an open mortgage on title, right, which is very common, but we can't get the information to order a payoff from the seller. Whether they don't reply to an email or get back to you with a phone call, or sometimes you speak with them and they just drag their feet and they don't get you the loan number and their last four of their social, or, the things that the bank needs to.
Yep.
A lot of times it's hard, getting an authorization from them. Oh, I've been working a lot lately. I'll get to it this weekend. Okay, well, it's Tuesday today. So now if you're going to wait till the weekend to do our authorization, realize that we can't order that payoff till Monday. You've just added a week to your process.
And by the way, that's the seller telling us that. Of course, our client, who's the investor who brought us the contract, is going, why can't we close? Go talk to your seller, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's like we have to pass the buck, but it doesn't matter. It still comes back on us. Well, you should be able to do this. It's like, well, we can lead the horse to water, but that's about all you can do.
Yeah. Some of the other things are IRS liens. Those are a big one. Those are something that a lot of times us in title, we can't really cure. The seller has to call. IRS is very particular about who they speak to. And I tell people, you can give us the authorization, but they drag their feet. It's much easier if you call, if you get a payoff from them. We tell investors, if you know that there's IRS, if there's tax liens on a property, go hard at the person you're buying the property from and right away get them working on that, because sometimes it's government you're dealing with, so they're not in a hurry, right?
I want to bring this to your attention too, and you already know this answer. This is just for the audience, is, if you're an investor, and you have the seller get a payoff, that's great. It's great to have that info. But in our offices, if you're the escrow officer, you better be ordering that payoff from the lender direct and not getting it from a third party, even the seller whose payoff it is. It has to be independent and obtained from the lender direct. And those are just Texas Department of Insurance rules and regulations. And I see so many officers who will accept that from the seller without getting it from the lender direct. And that's just a fail-safe to protect yourself, because people can manipulate things all over the place. So it's just being smart that way. And same with the IRS too, right? I mean, it's the government, by goodness. You're going to hurry up to wait and wait and wait. But ordering a payoff is usually pretty easy if you're going to pay it off. But trying to work something out, good luck.
Yeah, that's a thing we've run into, especially over the last handful of years, is, you get your commitment back and you start going through it with the seller, with agents, with, investors, and then you get this. Well, I'm negotiating with the IRS currently. Well, we're either paying it off for what it says, or we need to put the process on hold while you negotiate. There's no negotiating in the middle of a closing, right? You can't say, well, I've had people actually say, well, I know I owe them $32,000, but I think I'm going to knock it down to 18, so let's just pay 18 off. It doesn't work that way.
One of those famous words that Reagan said, hello, I'm from the government, here to help. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. The IRS doesn't care to help you. They don't care to do anything. It's just, it's amazing. It's worse than molasses. It's just drips, is what it seems like. So I get, mortgage loans. And by the way, I was going to say another thing that we see. This used to be horribly prevalent from about 2009 to 2015 because of the subprime era before that, where you're trying to get payoffs. There's an old mortgage on the property. There's a new mortgage, and they refinanced it, and it was paid off. But there's no release of lien. And that mortgage company has been out of business for the last 15 years. And now you got to go through the trouble of trying to dig up how you can get a release and verify and validate these things, even though it was paid off. Because you might have mortgage one, mortgage two, and then a third mortgage, and that second mortgage paid off the first and third mortgage, paid off the second, but they didn't get released. And it's just like, oh my gosh, those are the ones I really don't like, because now you got to hunt things down, and there's no one to help you hunt anything down with sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain things we can do in those situations. Obviously, it's nice to be able to reach out. You know, sometimes one bank bought the assets of a bank that went out of business, you know, so you can call them, have them go. Now, generally, it takes 2 or 3 days. They have to go through the old records, pull the file up, see what happens, to give you a release or acknowledgement that it's been paid off. Sometimes you have a policy from the previous closing if you're lucky, and you can get that, you know, and then you have indemnity from that underwriter. But I agree, those are really difficult. You know, one thing I would tell people when you get a payoff for your mortgage, one of the little things to look at there is, did they charge you the $10 for recording a release? Because banks are notorious for charging you the $10 or $25 for it, but then just sending you the release and not recording it.
Yeah. You know, today I believe there's a rule today, but that used to be the case. You know, and it was horrible because all the lenders, they would send the release to the seller, who had put it in the round file real quick. It's gone. They don't know what to do with it. Or they file it away somewhere, and that filing cabinet was left at the second house they moved from, and it's gone. And now you got to get the whole thing and figure out what's going on. Today, the lenders are supposed to record their payoffs direct. You know, I want to say that's a statute now that they have to do those kind of things for that exact very reason. And hopefully we can do away with most of that stuff. It's all filtering out of the system, it seems like, slowly.
Yeah, it's still a challenge. What I tell people, and I've told this to clients who we pay off their mortgage, you know, after closing, I tell them sometimes at the closing table, wait 30 days and then call your lender and ask them if they've recorded the release. And if not, just say, well, you're required to record it. You know, here's my email. I expect an email in the next 2 weeks with either the recorded release or at least acknowledgement that, hey, we've recorded it.
You know, I had one where the lender was actually being very proactive on a closing where we had insured around a mechanics-lien, which got resolved, and we needed a release of lien, and that was agreed upon. And it took 45 days for the holder of the mechanics-lien to get us the original release for recordation. I probably got at least 3, if not 4, emails from the new lender. I mean, the lender was protected and indemnified. It wasn't an issue. But they still wanted that. And I love the fact that this one person, the mortgage company, would just send me an email, have you got a recorded release yet? Have you got one? Finally got it yesterday. 45 days later, I was able to send it to them, solve the problem. But, you know, you want to stay on top of things. I just find, as much as that sounds great, that's a great way of handling it. They got to do their work, but they don't want to do it. They're lazy. Sellers, if they're done, pay it off, you wish they'd do that. That's for their protection. But also, I tell it to the buyer. Call your seller and say, hey, can you verify this happened? And just make sure of it. Or go online and check and make sure it got recorded. It just solves problems downstream for you. Well, that's great for guys like you and me who are in the industry, in the business, and think about it. But the sellers who are selling a house one time out of the chute, man, they don't think about that kind of stuff. Hardly never.
Yeah, but they should. I mean,
it's for their protection.
Me personally, I wouldn't want my name out there attached to something that's closed, right?
Yeah.
It's like, you know, it's like when you close a credit card, right? You make sure you verify it's closed before you cut up the card and everything like that. You don't want a number out there that's attached to you that's open. Somebody steals that number online, gets a hold of an old card or something, and next thing you know, you've got $3,000 on your credit, right?
Yep.
It's the same thing. You know, I know, as you said, a lot of people are lazy or they just don't think about it, but it is something seriously to think about. Get those removed, get those taken care of, and make sure your name isn't attached to a house you no longer own.
Yeah, I like that. You bet. So I get all those kind of things. You know, another thing I see all the time is I see buyers go to contract, and they don't ask the simple questions like, hey, if you're driving through a neighborhood and you see like a neighborhood pool or a neighborhood park or a facility or something that looks like it is, you should be going ding, ding, ding. There is probably an HOA here. And so many, if it's a gated community, mandatory HOA, you know that. If it's not, sometimes you don't know there's an HOA. Sometimes you do. But that just slows everything down because, okay, you have a contract, but who forgot about the HOA? The seller just didn't tell the buyer. Well, you need an HOA addendum maybe. Who's going to pay the resale cert fee or the transfer fee? You know, sometimes on our commitments, you don't know that there's an HOA either. And these are things that you need to know because now you have to order these kind of things. It may take another 2 or 3 or 4 days. And you want the seller, the buyer, to get this done day one. Get the documents transferred to the buyer, what you've got to do, get the resale certain transfer fees done. And to realize that in today's world, as a title company, unless we have substantial earnest money to cover those costs and fees, we're not going to order those things. Because if we order it, we got to pay for it. And it's like, Mr. Seller, that's your responsibility to do that, which they never want to do, and the buyer never wants to do it. But if they've got sufficient earnest money, that's great. And today, our contracts here in Texas, at least, cover us for that. So if we've got $3,000 of earnest money, and we're asked to order the HOA, and we've got to pay a fee to do that, we can at least recoup that money from the earnest money now, that's fairly new in the last year or two. Kind of like a survey, and if they need a survey, you should know this kind of things up front. Get it done. Mr. Seller, do you have an old existing survey? Get it to us so we can get it to underwriting for approval and ask the right questions. But these are all the little things that can slow down the process. And, it's not so bad in what I call the retail world, where you're doing an owner to an owner transaction. There's 30 days, usually 45 days between going to contract and closing. Things get done in interim pretty easy. In the investor world, it was yesterday, and no one wants to they don't want to get you enough information to make the right decisions, and it just slows everything down.
Yeah, HOAs can really slow you down. You said 2, 3, 4 days. That's optimistic. There's a lot of HOAs it'll take 2 weeks, to get everything. So that really slows it down. I've seen deals fall apart at the table because that wasn't disclosed on certain deals. And then the buyer comes to the table and looks at their settlement statement. It's like, well, what do you mean that I'm going to have to pay $350 a month to an HOA? I don't want to live in an HOA community. I don't want to pay that much. It's really important that all gets disclosed up front, but that's a big slowdown a lot of times. And you brought up surveys. It's the same thing. If there's a lender involved, generally they're going to want the endorsement on their policy to protect themselves from survey issues. We try and ask the seller, hey, do you have an existing survey up front? If they say no, then, we tell them, talk to the agents, I'll tell them up front, there's going to be a lender involved on the buyer side. 99% of the time, they want that endorsement. You need to, both sides need to talk and figure out who's going to pay for a survey and get it ordered. Us as the title company, generally, we don't try and pay for surveys. What I will do, though, is, I'll look up 2, 3, 4 survey companies, get an estimated price from them, and say, hey, here's 3 numbers to 3 companies. Here's the price that they want. Call one of them and get them out as soon as possible. Nowadays, just like with appraisals, surveyors aren't necessarily sitting around waiting for work to do, right? No. I hear from a lot of lenders that getting, houses inspected and stuff is, a process. There's a lot of business out there, and a lot of these, inspectors aren't available. It's the same thing with surveyors. You can maybe find somebody who says, hey, I've got time next week to go out. But a lot of times you call these surveyors and they're like, hey, I'm booked for the next 2 weeks. It's going to be, 15 days before I can get out there. Now, if you search around, you can generally find somebody that get out there within a week. But again, we're going back to it depends where you're at. If you're kind of out in the middle of a rural area and somebody's got to drive, an hour or an hour and a half to get out there to do a survey, they may not be able to get out there for a while. So these are things that you need to jump on right away. Investors should know to, identify these things right away and get people moving on them.
Yeah, they should. But, I think just having a good working knowledge of this. And one more thing just came to mind, too, is this is really the one that should be done day one is, does the seller really own the property? I know we talked about that a little bit. But, man, I see it so often that, there's an heir that lives in the property that they think that person is the owner, and that guy doesn't tell me differently until we find out. And it's just, if you do some homework up front before you go to that meet and greet for the first time, and you've done your homework online, oftentimes you can find those things and have a working knowledge looking at the CAD, the history in the CAD or on deed records. That's one of the things I'm big about is I call it know before you go and get a good feel for the situation or a reasonable anticipation. So when you get there, you're going to ask these questions and you can get so much of this stuff out of the way so you're able to move forward quickly and solve that problem. But I do think that having that good working knowledge is what really helps everyone get these deals to the closing table as fast as possible. Because Gary, if If the deal don't close, there ain't nobody making money, right? So we're not here to not make a deal close. We're going to find any way possible to get it done. And it's in our best interest. And we all want money yesterday. But sometimes you just got to go through the steps and get it done. And the more you can help the closing agent with these kind of things, the better it is.
Absolutely.
Yep. So guys, I hope you found the video helpful. If you did, take a minute and like it, please. You know, have any comments about this, comment below. We'll do our best to get back to you as well. And come see us over on our YouTube channel as well. And as usual, y'all, we'll see you next time.